Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, his church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Welcome to another edition of the Q Ideas Podcast. I'm Gabe Lyons. Thanks for joining with us. And as summer is on the move, I hope we can be a partner with you this summer as you take time to digest really important conversations and learning. We're in a season right now where we're getting hit with a lot of information. There's a lot of chaos, and our job and what we exist to do and have done over the last 15 years is to try to help educate you, try to help guide you towards truth, guide you towards good thinking that's not wrapped up in just the moment, but that's long-term, that understands the consequences, that looks not just over the next few months, but looks over the next few years and few decades, and helps us think well as Christians about how do we lead our communities, our churches, our families to flourish the most. So today's talk, it's 9 minutes, but it is packed. And it's such an important concept that I'm excited for you to hear called food as freedom. Now, food is something we all consume every single day. And yet in the last year, when the pandemic hit, we started to see grocery shelves empty. We started to see a panic set in. We started to see people start to rethink food supply and how does food work? And what if I don't have access to food? Or what if the prices of food goes up and inflation starts to set in and it's harder to get access to food? And for the first time for many people in America, they were questioning, I don't know that I feel secure about food. Well, today you're going to get to hear a talk from somebody who's worked in the food space over the entire globe. His name is Dr. Jason Streubel. He's described as Dr. Dirt because his expertise is in soil. It's in the dirt that we actually plant in. He understands all the dynamics, the chemicals, the saturation, how God's designed food to grow. And when we have space to create food supply in our own local communities, we start to have more freedom. Now, this is a dynamic many of you maybe haven't thought about. Well, when you start to look to the third world, the developing world, you start to see this play out, and it's much more obvious. Those that have access to their own food have more freedom. Those who are relying on others to supply their food start to see their freedom decrease. And so we wanted to talk about that. We wanted to hear from somebody who works and serves as the Senior Director for Agriculture and Food Security at Convoy of Hope. This is a faith-based nonprofit organization that wants to help feed the world's children through their initiatives, community outreach, and disaster response. Now, Jason holds a PhD in soil science from Washington State University and built numerous agriculture projects customized to the needs in the areas Convoy of Hope serves. And he believes this, and you're going to hear this, that ending poverty depends heavily on food security and locally sustainable agriculture solutions. Now, as you hear Jason, I want you to think about something. We're not just talking about the developing world. We're talking about the Western world. What does it mean for you? What does it mean in your community? What kind of security do you have to food? How does your food supply work? It's going to cause you to think about that and to ask some bigger questions. And so as we listen in now to Dr. Jason Streubel, I hope it'll inspire you to have a new perspective on food.
I grew up in the woods of Western Washington, about an hour and a half north of Seattle, at the base of Mount Baker, the last volcano in the continental United States. And it is there on my grandfather's cherry orchard that I started to wrestle with understanding my journey with understanding people, the complexity of food, agriculture, and cow manure. It was on one of those days in the orchard towards the end of my grandfather's life that we had one of those conversations that'll never leave you. I said, Bomps, do you have any regrets in life? Now, my grandfather fished in Alaska at 16, lied to get into the military at 17, was an orchardist, a firefighter, a high-functioning alcoholic. And my aunt's birthday does not match up with their wedding day. So I knew there were things that my grandfather could have said. But instead, he said this: my biggest regret in life was killing deer out of season. Because in my early days, my family was poor and hungry, And hunger and poverty will make you do things you would have never imagined. Now, that wasn't the grandfather that I knew, but it explained a lot. The orchard, the largest garden you had ever seen, the hours and hours of canning that we did, because my grandfather understood that food was freedom. Food as a means to freedom, food as freedom, really food is freedom. Because the ability to know where your next meal is coming from is empowering. And if you don't know how to answer that question, it becomes all-encompassing. As the hunger pains increase, and you will do whatever you can to get food on the table and your next meal for you and your family. My grandfather learned that lesson firsthand, and it's a lesson that I think that the church has to learn. That food is complicated, food is political, and that food is very spiritual. Food is complicated. Well, teaching junior and senior high school outside of Seattle area, I brought chickens into the classroom to be able to show the cycle of life and composting and chicken manure. And to the dismay of my class, it was the time that they realized that nuggets, wings, and chicken breast came from a chicken, which then led to the realization that hamburger didn't come from a grocery store. I would like to say that that is the norm or the rarity, but unfortunately, it's normal. Because we have a large disconnect that is generational on where our food comes from. In the United States, 1.3% of the population produces the food that we eat on 2 million farms. In 1935, that was 7 million farms. In 1885, 70% of the population produces the food that we eat. Now, that decrease is because of some amazing advancements in technology, but those advancements in technology have complicated food. And when we think about that morsel of food that each one of you right now is like, what is my favorite food? And the saliva starts to come. How does it get to this table? It is very complicated. And as a scientist, let me tell you that at some point, all food is farm to table. But how does it get there? There's the grower and all of the world that they live in, the farmer, the inputs, the outputs, the machinery, the land use, the land tenure. And then there's the processors, the storage, the more processing and the more storage. Then there's the buyers, the sellers, the inspectors, and the consumer. And then there is the soil, and I wish I could just, it is the most amazingly designed thing that God ever created when it's working in the system and it shows God's creation everywhere. But I can't go down that road. Then there's the human skill. Then there's the transportation at the next level, from the farm to all those places, road, river, rail, sea. Then there's the role of government. Imports, exports, tariffs, taxes, treaties. And then there's the government leaders. And every one of those is a key component to how we get food on the table or if it doesn't. And if something in that system goes wrong, we will do everything possible and things that we never thought imagined to get it, because food is freedom. Now, the elephant in the room when we talk about the complexities of agriculture is changing climate. I can tell you that during my soils PhD, my research revolved around climate change, greenhouse gases, biochar, and 30,000 gallons of liquid cow manure. So when they say what comes out of the backside of a cow, I know it intimately, but that's not the changing climate that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the changing climate in leadership and the power that it has over food. George Washington, one of the very first things that he did was create a census for this country, and he paid for it by himself because he understood if we did not know where our food was coming from, we would not survive. Abraham Lincoln laid the foundation for today's food stamp program because he understood that if people didn't have access to affordable food, the country would collapse. During World War II, we were all told to grow victory gardens, and it didn't matter if we liked our neighbor or not. Do it because we could not win the war if we did not have food at home. We've all been around political conversations long enough to see that political and food go together. I've been around conversations where food has been used as an amazing tool or as a weapon of mass destruction. Food is complex. And because of its complexity, whoever is in the politics and who is in control controls the people and controls freedom. And as we as a church explore what that means for us, I implore us to be the hands and feet of Jesus and to jump into the mess or the excrement of humanity and feed our communities. Because in the end, it is very spiritual. John 10:10 says that the enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy, but I have come that you might have life. All around the world, the enemy wants to keep people from thriving, and he uses hunger and poverty to do it. I have seen it while staring down witch doctors in the fields of Haiti, and I've seen it for 17 years pastoring in the Pacific Northwest. And when all of the rest of his lies are gone, he will revert to food. Because he knows that if people don't know where their next meal is coming from, they will do things they never imagined. I will sell myself into slavery. I will sell my child into slavery. I will join the Taliban. I will have my child join the Taliban. I'll kill a deer out of season. The devil has been using food since the days of Adam and Eve. And God knows that food is so powerful. And that's why he said, save the corners of the field for the poor and the hungry. That's why he had Joseph store food to save the genealogy of Christ. That's why he used fish and loaves to feed thousands to show his power. And it's how he spread the church, because the disciples could go, but the elders got to stay, and they were able to feed the widow and the orphan. Food is spiritual. And I promise you, I am not a doomsday guy. I don't have a bunker. I am a ham radio operator. But as a church, we have to understand that food is complex, it is political, and it is spiritual. And we have to understand what that means for us now and understand that we are at a possible changing tide. And this can be our greatest hour of humanity when food security becomes a thing that the church does, or it could be our biggest blind spot. So as you think about what that means for you, if you have not thought about it, you are already behind, because the devil's been thinking about it for generations.
I just love how Jason challenges us at the end here. And he says this can become our greatest hour of humanity when food security becomes a thing that the church does, or it can be our biggest blind spot. What a challenge. It reminds me of several talks from our event last year that started to challenge churches even to think about planting gardens, to think about their role within the community of being a source for the community to gather food, to be a part of food production in their own communities. For some of you listening, maybe that's not something you've thought much about lately, but I think this is the time for us to be thinking about it, and Jason challenged us to do that. I also want to just say, Jason's organization, Convoy of Hope, man, what an amazing organization. We've been partners with them for many, many years, and I've been able to see up close and personal the way in which they help meet the needs of the most vulnerable. Even this last year during the pandemic, working with churches to supply them with the food so that cars would be wrapped around church parking lots, out into the road, stretching for miles. The church being the place that was distributing the food when people needed it the most. That was the work of Convoy of Hope, working through the local church to help communities. They not only do that in the U.S., they do it all around the world. I want you to learn more about them, and you can do that at convoyofhope.org. You can see the work, some of the projects that Dr. Jason Streubel has done related to agriculture. You can see the ways in which they're trying to serve the most vulnerable all around the world, but also right in our backyard. When disasters strike, Convoy of Hope's becoming quickly one of the main places the American church is turning to to supply them with the funds needed to go and distribute and be first boots on the ground in all of these different situations. So get to know convoyofhope.org. You'll hear more about them from our work here at Q Ideas. We believe so much in what they're doing, and we hope you'll partner with them. Now, if you listen to this talk or somebody shared it with you for the first time and you want to have access to more talks like this, not only subscribe to this podcast, but you can get a free trial to Q Media where you can have access to all of this on video. You can watch multiple talks. We did dozens of talks at our most recent Culture Summit. At qideas.org/trial, you can get 30 days free and start to have access to more and more thoughtful conversations like this one, dealing with issues that it's hard to find space where you're hearing this conversation. We're creating a conversation that you're not going to find on the nightly news. You're not going to necessarily find it just on your web search. It's not going to probably show up in your news feed. You have to be intentional in your own growth to think well about this cultural moment. And we want to be your partner in that education alongside your friends and the conversations that it can create. So we hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll have more talks for you next week.